You've mostly heard that America is a democracy, but that's not what Benjamin Franklin called it.
You're listening to Wealth Talks with Dr. Tom and John McPhee. We have a special guest on the line for you today. Mr. Rick Green was a former Texas legislator. He's founder of Patriot Academy, and he is America's Constitution coach, and he speaks around the country on the secrets of American national success. Mr. Green, welcome to the show.
Hey, guys. Great to be with you. Thanks for letting me come on.
It's a pleasure. You know, we were talking just a couple of weeks ago to Chris Dunham, and your name came up as somebody who would be great to be on the podcast. So this is our first time talking with each other, and we're looking forward to hear a little bit more about what it is that you do.
Well, I'm honored to be with you, and love Chris Dunham. So if you're a friend of Chris, you're a friend of mine.
Wonderful.
So, Mr. Green, right off the bat, what was it that Benjamin Franklin said that he had given, the Constitutional Congress had given the people of the United States? It wasn't just a democracy, it was a republic. And how is that different than just a pure democracy?
I am so glad. I loved your opening line. I'm glad you led with that, because most people, the vast majority of people, think we're a democracy. Certainly we are not. In fact, the founders were very negative on democracy. They called it a, quote, mobocracy. They talked about the fact that democracy always ends in violence, that it's not good. So they were not fans of democracy. They were fans of being a republic. In fact, it was kind of a Goldilocks situation. You know, they looked at every government that had ever existed in the history of man. They said, no, this one's too big. This one's too small. This one doesn't do enough. And they basically said, look, you know, even a straight up republic is not a good idea, because that just means you elect people and you hope they do the best thing.
Mm-hmm.
So they settled on the Goldilocks, it's perfect formula of a constitutional republic, which means as a republic, yes, we elect representatives. We choose our leaders. We can't all sit around and vote on every issue of the day or be informed on every issue of the day. So there is a value in representative government, but they knew it was going to be important to hold those representatives to some limit on their power and to have what we call jurisdictions. Now, that's something people don't really talk about today, but knowing that they only had specific authority and it was limited by that piece of paper we call a constitution. And so being a constitutional republic is so important. And I love the fact you talked about Ben Franklin. I've stood on those steps where he walked out and was asked that question, what kind of government have you given us? And not only did he say a republic, the very important part was next. He said a republic if you can keep it.
Yes.
And that is the vital part that most of us as citizens don't remember and have not accepted that responsibility that comes with the rights. So that's what we're passionate about, is people accepting that responsibility to make sure that republic is something we can keep.
Absolutely. So we're going through some interesting times right now. First, we had the lockdowns around the whole coronavirus situation, and then more lately, it's been rioting and violence that has been quite widespread. And we'll be touching on both of these points here, but let's just starting with the virus. We were talking to Rabbi Daniel Lapin a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how
another one of my favorites. I can't believe I didn't know you guys until today. You're hanging out with Chris Dunham and Rabbi Lapin. You need a rabbi.com. Rabbi Lapin's website. I love that man. He's been a great influence on our family. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you got me excited just mentioning his name.
Okay, wonderful. Well, he was pointing out just the other day that you can do just about anything in the name of public health. And many people with the lockdowns, they felt that their constitutional rights had been infringed upon. What does the Constitution justify in terms of the lockdown, or which measures can be taken constitutionally?
It's a great question. And in fact, I would encourage people, I've done a whole video series on this from back in March when it first started, because we started getting so many questions like, you know, can government intervene in a pandemic? And if so, what can they do? And the first question is, what is the jurisdiction of government? Which government gets to do this? Is it federal? Is it state? Is it local? And then what can they do? How far can they go? And I'll just tell you generally, we have never, ever in our history done what we're doing right now. Even in the pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu, that was, by the way, 25 times more deadly than what we're dealing with right now. 25 times. Even in that situation, we didn't do statewide lockdowns. We didn't tell healthy people to stay home. We didn't force people to close their businesses across the board, across the entire state. In very limited circumstances, we did limit some public gatherings, some businesses such as theaters and bars and that sort of thing for a very limited time. This idea that government has the power through it because of a pandemic to basically put a pause on the Constitution is completely wrong, and it's unfortunate that virtually every state. There's been a handful. I have been singing the praises of Kristi Noem in South Dakota. She's been the best governor in the country on this. She's recognized those constitutional jurisdictions. She's limited what is done in her state. She's taken a real common sense, but most importantly, constitutionally sound approach to this. But virtually every other governor in the country has just followed the leftist off the cliff and said we can use government to do anything we want. Most state statutes actually say that. State statutes that have been passed for what we call disaster acts to give this kind of unlimited power. But we have to remember that those statutes were passed with the idea of a hurricane comes through town, destroys the town, and you've got looting or whatever. And in those situations, because of safety, this shelter in place thing, that whole idea is for a few hours because the tornado's coming. So shelter in place right now, or for a few days because the tornado or hurricane destroyed everything and we need to get in there and, bring in the National Guard and hazard protection. Those things were for very limited time frames. We're 4 months into this, guys. We're almost 5 months into this. And we have governors acting like dictators with zero accountability, zero checks and balances. It's the antithesis of what Article 4, Section 4 of our U.S. Constitution says, that every state is guaranteed a republic, that we're guaranteed the idea that there are checks and balances, that not one person, we're not going to ever allow for one person to make law and then enforce that law. I mean, it's scary, guys. I think it's a dangerous precedent. We have seen religious freedom trampled upon. We've seen Second Amendment rights trampled upon. I mean, virtually every area of the Constitution has been ignored in one state or another. So I'm sorry for the long answer, but I'm very passionate about this idea that the Constitution doesn't sleep in a pandemic. And several courts have already said that. But boy, we're in a mess right now.
So along those same lines, most of the states that I've seen, they have the right, the governor has the right for an executive order for a certain period of time before the legislature has to meet and extend any lockdown or isolation or quarantine. But along those same lines, what's happening in Portland, Oregon right now, where federal officials are coming in and taking people, quote unquote, off the street? And these governors are now suing the federal government. Where does the Constitution stand on that? What does the president, what does the federal government have a right to do in these states that are allowing, $23 million of property being destroyed in Portland, Oregon?
Yeah, it's almost the other end of the spectrum. It's government not doing enough in this situation, not doing its job. One of the few things we expect government to do, certainly in the founders' eyes, is to protect our rights. It's not to provide for us, but it is to protect us, and that's why the Declaration lays that out and talks about when it talks about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It follows that with that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So the only power of government comes from us, but we did give government or loan government the power to protect us in these situations. When you have violence in the street, that's when you expect the police to be there or the National Guard in some of these situations. It's amazing to me that some of these mayors, and it started with the Minneapolis mayor, literally have told the police to stand down, to back away and let the looters and rioters have their way. I never thought I would see that in America. And so the federal government does have a responsibility under the guarantee clause in Article 4 to make sure that these rights are protected. And if a state is not going to protect its people, absolutely the government has the power and the responsibility, frankly, to step in. So I'm actually supportive of President Trump sending in troops to take care of these situations where the mayors are literally handing the streets over to violence. And I know you guys have seen the videos of innocent people being beaten.
Yes.
Children have been shot. I mean, it is to an extent right now where people are saying, well, if the government's not going to protect me, I'm going to have to protect myself, which actually I've always been an advocate of that. That's what the Second Amendment's for. It's not for hunting. For all my fellow hunters out there, I love hunting, but the Second Amendment has nothing to do with pheasants or white-tailed deer. It has everything to do with what the founders called, quote, the first law of nature, which is the right of self-defense. So anyway, didn't mean to go down that rabbit trail, but I think most people out there are saying, hey, I'm going to have to learn to defend myself. And that's something we've been big advocates for years, but most people are starting to wake up and say, yep, it's time.
So in 1913, it was kind of a ominous year for the United States. You know, the Federal Reserve, the income tax, and the fact that legislatures in the Senate were now put in by popular vote rather than appointed by the state legislatures. How has that eroded the Constitution of representative government? And now they're talking about doing away with the Electoral College. What will that do to citizens and states' rights?
You guys ask the best questions of any interview I've been on. I mean, your finger is on the pulse. That's exactly right. 1913, worst year for the U.S. Constitution. We got both the income tax with the 16th Amendment, which the Constitution allowed for an income tax, but it had to be apportioned evenly among the states. It was more of a capitation tax. It wasn't a progressive income tax. But still, 16th Amendment and the 17th is what you just mentioned, where we went from allowing our legislatures to choose the Senate, and then we, the people, choose the House members, which was a brilliant, brilliant combination the founders came up with. Another check and balance, if you will. In this case, it was a check and balance where the states had a check on the federal government. And just think about it this way. If the federal government is considering a new program that's going to create some big expenditure or some regulation on people, and it's stepping over into what the states normally would do, then think about what your state legislators, like I was a state rep, so I might be sitting at the Capitol and I see that the federal government's considering creating something like, I don't know, maybe a universal health care plan that's going to step into, or maybe even agriculture. We're going to have the federal government create a Department of Agriculture that's nowhere in the United States Constitution, but they're going to micromanage our farmers and ranchers here in Texas. Well, as a state rep, I'm going to look at that and go, wait a minute, that's not your job at the federal government. That's my job at the state level. And I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call that U.S. Senator for Texas, and I'm going to say, hey, don't forget who put you in office. It's the state legislators and the state senators that put you in office. So you better back off. You're stepping on our turf. And he's going to hang up the phone and he's going to think twice about how he votes. And he's not going to vote for that overreach of the federal government. We don't have that anymore because the state reps and the state senators don't choose those U.S. senators anymore. The U.S. senators are like the House members. They come home making promises. I'm going to bring home the bacon, more expenditures. I'm going to save you. I'm going to take care of you. And we no longer have that state check on the federal government. So that's the long answer to your question. The short answer is just look at the growth of the federal government since 1913, and it's like a hockey stick curve. It explodes because you no longer have the check on the federal government. Now you have the federal government doing everything that the state governments used to do. And it's one of the things I'm a big advocate for is repealing the 17th Amendment and going back to having our U.S. senators chosen by the state legislatures so that you have a good balance in Washington instead of the balance leaning towards the federal government like it does now.
Interesting.
Yes. And along that, then, the electorate vote, the Electoral College, how would that take away the rights of Americans?
I'm so glad you mentioned that because there's a big movement out there called the National Popular Vote, and they want to get rid of the Electoral College. They think it's old, it's not necessary for today. In fact, most of the advocates for National Popular Vote, they actually say we want a pure democracy. It's on their websites, most of the legislators that call for this. And that's why I mentioned at the top of the program that you don't want democracy. You certainly don't want pure democracy. It's chaos. It ends in chaos. It's not what you want. But the Electoral College itself has served us incredibly well. This was created by a committee there at the Constitutional Convention, a committee of 11 guys that looked at every form of government, and they said, okay, maybe we want a prime minister that's chosen by the House, or maybe chosen by the Senate, or maybe we want the states to choose the president. I mean, they looked at every possible combination. Maybe we want popular vote. Maybe we don't want popular. They looked at all of this, and they kind of took every idea and put it together, and that's why the Electoral College uses all of this. The Electoral College allows us to have a state voice in who the president's going to be, to have the people's voice in who the president's going to be, and even allows, if nobody gets a majority in the Electoral College, the House to have a voice in who the president's going to be. And that's happened. That's how John Quincy Adams became president. Nobody got a majority of the Electoral College vote. And I think we're up to 5 times now that the president did not get the popular vote, but did win the Electoral College. That's not necessarily a bad thing. If you think about it, if you go to popular vote, who's going to choose the president? It's going to be the big cities. You're now going to have Los Angeles and Houston and Cleveland, and all the big cities are going to choose the president. and the fraud will be encouraged. Right now, if you commit fraud in a presidential race, your best result is going to be the Electoral College votes from that state. Whereas now, if you have an area that's corrupt and they're running up the vote and they're using fraud, they can win the whole presidency in those inner cities. And I agree with Benjamin Rush, who he was a signer of the Declaration, and in a letter to Thomas Jefferson, he said, look, God created the country, man made the cities. He said, I grew them as great abscesses they're like abscesses on the human body. It's where all of the evil goes. Because they believed in the depravity of man, they knew the more people you cram into one place, the more likely that's going to be a depraved area. We need the country to still have a voice. The country doesn't have a voice if you get rid of the Electoral College. The big cities will decide everything. It will move us more towards democracy and more on that path, kind of like getting rid of the senators being elected by the legislators, away from a republic. It's a really dangerous thing, really bad thing. A lot of states have already adopted it, and they're really close to actually pushing this thing over the edge. So I encourage people in whatever state you're in, ask your legislature to back off of the national popular vote and hold on to this constitutional principle known as the Electoral College, because it is really good for our country.
Mm-hmm. Very good.
So here at Life Benefits, we often talk to people about how wealth is more than just money. And in fact, it's even been said that time is money. And here a few months ago, we were interviewing George Gilder, and he said that there are even professors now at certain colleges that are going and calculating the value of goods and services in terms of time rather than in terms of money. So how does it tie into all the social unrest that we're seeing right now, both around the virus and around the rioting and the racism, protests, whatnot? How does that tie into the fact that to the economic side of things when it comes to the Constitution?
Well, I think you could even go back to Jefferson changing life, liberty, and property to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And when he did that, he wasn't just kind of modifying John Locke and saying, I'm going to do it my way. He was actually using more of Locke's writings. Locke writes about pursuit of happiness in his essay on human understandings. And so he's really combining different Locke writings. But he was also respecting exactly what you just described, that everybody's pursuit of happiness is a little bit different. Now, back then, agrarian society, most people, it was tied to their property and being able to farm. But as we grew as an industrial society and frankly, the best free enterprise system in the world, it became all about your personal time. What could you sell your time for in terms of what you invented or what you how you served other people or whatever it might be. And I think the founders recognizing that at that point in history in 1776 was a big deal. Today, I think you're right. I mean, I think it's even more of an issue today. And unfortunately, right now, you're not even allowed to use your time and
Yes.
sell your services. The government has co-opted that. The founders were adamant about the fact that you don't have a free society if you don't have free enterprise. If people are not allowed to use, as Franklin described it, the greatest motivation, which is the profit, for you to be driven by that profit motive and make the most of your time and your energy and your elbow grease and your ingenuity, then you wouldn't have freedom. And Jefferson said, we're the most free when we're left to our individual decisions, that you're going to get the most prosperity when you do that. So I'm not sure if that answers your question correctly, but I think you're right that is we've lost that concept, and I hope we come back to that. It's part of the fallacy of the minimum wage, right? If the minimum wage tries to have government set a value on your time instead of you being the one to decide how much you're willing to work for, and as an employer being to decide how much that hour is worth if I'm serving you for that hour. This faith in government bureaucrats it blows my mind. I mean, why would we ever want somebody in Washington, D.C. that we're never going to meet in our life to decide how much money we can make, or a city council in Seattle? We saw how much that destroyed the low income earners in Seattle when they adopted this $15 minimum wage and then bumped it up to $18. It's so bad for the economy. We should get to decide what our time is worth, not some government bureaucrat.
Absolutely. When you institute a minimum wage, now the low income earners become the new unemployed. That's what ends up happening.
And we've seen it over and over and over again.
And we're seeing something like this happen around us all the time. Why can the big box stores remain open, selling all the goods and services that the small individual shops sell, just maybe not all of what the big box stores sell? Who gives the government the right to say that Ma and Pa on the corner can't sell the same goods that Costco does? That's where are the lawsuits? Are they coming forth?
Yeah.
Do you see them happening? This is direct violation against what the founders gave us in their gift to us in the Constitution.
I agree with you 1,000%. I mean, you talk about equal protection. That means something. And the idea that some government bureaucrat, or in most cases around the country, a governor, is going to decide who's essential and who's not essential, and the hypocrisy and the duplicity that we see playing out from what you just described, where certain stores are allowed to remain open and not the mom and pops, which, by the way, I think this 4 or 5 months we're going to feel the repercussions of this for decades. The number of people, the small shops that have been destroyed as a result of this, it is so bad for our economy long term, not just this year in this chaos, but the duplicity of saying, okay, big store, you can stay open. Little guy, you can't stay open. Or, hey, Walmart, you can stay open, but the church can't meet, and you can't. It's somehow that's unconstitutional, or I'm sorry, dangerous, and yet the big store can stay open. Or even worse, tens of thousands of people can gather in the street, shoulder to shoulder, most of them not wearing masks, and that's okay if it's part of the governor's political agenda, but it's not okay for us to gather in our churches or gather for a rally that's saying we want our businesses to be able to open back up. The hypocrisy is so obvious to most of us. If you just have your eyes open and you're not driven by emotion, but you actually look at the facts and you watch these videos side by side, you go, this can't be right. This can't be happening in America. I feel like I've stepped back in time to George Orwell's 1984, and we're living it out. I mean, they have rewritten what words mean and what laws mean. And frankly, guys, to sum it up, we're in all of this, both the riots on one hand and the COVID crackdowns on the other hand. Both of them are the result of civic ignorance. We have allowed ourselves to get to the point where we don't know our history, we don't know our Constitution, we don't know our rights, and we don't know our responsibilities. If we can educate people, ignorance is curable. If we can educate people and have civic literacy, we can not only stop this nonsense, we can prevent it from happening again. It's a Herculean task. I mean, I hate to say it this way, we have an ignorant population. I mean, I was that way. I graduated from one of the best law schools in America, and I didn't know my rights. I didn't know the Constitution. It took a personal journey to learn these things.
Yeah, so that brings up the next question that I have for you. What can the average Joe do? We see all this stuff happening around us. In many cases, people are the victims of this. They're experiencing the financial hardships that come with these restrictions. What can the average person do during these times in order to keep the liberties that we do have and to bring back the ones that have been encroached upon?
Well, I hate to sound cliche, but it begins with education, personal education, being willing to say, I'm not going to depend on anybody else. I'm going to personally dive in. I'm going to become a student of freedom so that I know my rights. It's not difficult. It's not complex. We actually give away our Constitution classes for free. We want to see millions of people go through this. We've had over 100,000 do it so far. We make it fun. I actually teach our Constitution class in Independence Hall. So I'm standing in the room where the Declaration was done and the Constitution was done, and we do a live class in there, and that's what we make available to people at constitutioncoach.com. But it's more than studying yourself. You also have to become a voice for this. You have to become a silent majority will not win a war like this. It's got to be a vocal majority. Even a vocal minority will win a war like this. So even if you think it's all lost because too many people are on the government dole now, or too many people have bought the lies of the left that have been, poisoning our society and taught to our young people on college campuses across the country for the last 50 years, even if you think it's too far gone because we're now a small percentage, just remember, only 3% fought in the Revolutionary War. Only about 6 or 7% were part of it, actually participated in some way, either by donating or serving in office or whatever it might be. Only 25% supported independence. 25% were against it, and 50% weren't even paying attention and maybe didn't even realize it happened. We're
That's
sometimes
incredible.
that foolish, right? So just remember, it's a small percentage, and you can be part of that. So I'm sorry to give a long answer, but number one, they got to get educated. So become a student of the Constitution and our freedom. And number two, become active. You have to take action in helping to educate other people. Become a volunteer Constitution coach. So we do this. We give it away. You can sign up for free and take the class with other people. Get them to join you on Zoom, or join you in your living room or at your church and start teaching this class. And then lastly, be ready to defend your family. And I just recently started saying this in every interview I do. It's a passion of mine. to get people prepared to defend themselves and their family. You can't count on government to do that for you right now. So come take one of our constitutional defense courses. It's a unique combination. I teach on the Constitution live, but at the same time, you're on the range learning how to use your handgun safely and appropriately, and I promise you, you'll walk away confident and able to defend your family. All of that, constitutioncoach.com is where they can learn more.
Wonderful. Constitutioncoach.com. Be sure to get that, and I'll put that link in the resources as well, so people will have that.
Rick, I have one last question for you. Pilate answered Jesus, "What is truth?" And today, there's so many people that are searching for the truth, and we hear your truth, my truth. The Constitution was written by men. Where do we get our authority to know that that is the truth and that is something that we should support and learn more about?
You did it again. Y'all have absolutely the best questions. Your listeners are going to think I sent you these questions because I'm bragging on them so much, but we didn't do that, did we, guys? Y'all are right on the money. I've been saying recently, you don't get to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness in the Declaration unless you start with, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Truth is absolutely necessary if you're going to have a stable, prosperous, free society. And we have run from truth for the last 50 years. We were built on the idea that there is absolute truth. That's why it says we hold these truths to be self-evident. If there are no absolute truths, if we believe in moral relativism, which is what has been poisoning our society for 50 years, if we buy into that, then there is no stability. There is no life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There is no equal protection for all. There is no free enterprise. We lose all of those things if we lose truth. So where do we find truth? Well, I believe you have to have all three of these. You have to have a biblical, historical, and constitutional perspective to find truth. You've got to seek that truth by studying history. What actually works? Not what is people just pontificate on in the classroom, what some professor says. But what can you look into history and go, wait a minute, that actually works every time it's tried, or that fails every time it's tried. Free enterprise, constitutional principles like we have. The good thing about our principles in our Constitution and our Declaration is they work every time they're tried. Socialism fails every time it's tried. It has never worked. It is, in fact, at our Patriot Academy, our youth leadership program, by the end of the week, if the word socialism is spoken by anyone, you will immediately hear all of our students say, is bad, very, very bad, because they're learning how bad it is. And so truth it's there for us if we'll just look into history and see what works and what doesn't work. And our founders did that. I mean, I've said it a couple times, but it's so true. They were students of history. They studied every government. They studied these things to be able to find that truth. And that's why they started with that idea, we hold these truths. I think the good news is that truth does win out when it is spoken boldly, with grace, of course, and with love. But the reason we're losing right now in America, when I say we, I'm talking about freedom-loving folks. The reason we're losing the debate is because we're afraid to speak truth. People have cowered down and they've been afraid to say, even basic biology, that there's only male and female. We're afraid to say that. And it's so common sense. It's just science. We're supposed, they say conservatives don't like science. Wait a minute. Conservatives are the ones saying biology actually can't be argued with. You can't change this. But we're afraid to speak truth on those fronts. And now we're afraid to speak truth on basic economics and the basic idea of what works and what doesn't work and how much bondage people would be put in if we buy into these socialist ideas. So you're so right, guys. You've got to come back to truth. I think, there's so many things I'd love to recommend, but, even Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. So many books like that if people would go back to reading these great books and have once again a love for learning. And again, you don't have to have grown up in this stuff. I didn't know 99% of this stuff when I was done with law school. It became a journey of wanting to know, wait a minute, why am I so blessed to live in freedom? Where did this come from? And it came from suddenly realizing the sacrifice of our military veterans and realizing these folks gave their lives so that I could be free. Don't I owe it to them to study what that freedom actually is and to actually live it out, not just be a spoiled leech on society. but to say, wait a minute, I'm going to earn this freedom that I've been given. I'm going to be a part of the solution and make sure that my kids and grandkids get to enjoy the same thing. So that truth is out there. It is found very much in our founding documents and in the writings of our founding fathers. And it doesn't mean they were right about everything. Certainly there were some things they really messed up on. But history will prove that the principles they put into the Declaration of Independence led to the greatest, most free, most benevolent, most powerful nation in the history of the world. And it's those principles in the Declaration that Lincoln stood upon with the Emancipation Proclamation. It's those principles that Martin Luther King marched upon and quoted from and heralded. Those are the principles that are timeless. They work every time they're tried. And if we will bring them back, if we'll teach them, if we'll learn them ourselves, and we'll teach them to our friends and family, I believe we can restore those principles and America can see great days again. If we ignore those principles, if we buy the lies that have been taught on our college campuses for the last 50 years, America's done for. I mean, there's no people that think America is going to last forever just because. That's foolish. If you again look into history, great nations fall, and our nation can fall, and we're watching it fall in many ways right now. We can save it, but we've got to come back to the formula that produces good results.
Those are good words to think on and act on, because we are on the precipice if we're not already got one leg over the slippery slope.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with you. I'm sure you guys listening will really enjoy this as well. Go to constitutioncoach.com to find more about Rick Green's materials on the Constitution and how you can take action in productive and positive ways during these times.
Rick, we've got to have you back again to expound. We didn't even get into contracts or that today. So can we do this again sometime?
I would absolutely love it, and I'm serious. You guys, I love the way you got your finger on the pulse of where the challenges are and what the solutions are as well. So this is intellectual stimulation in my book. So let's do it again, brother. It was great.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. We will look forward to this again. You are listening to Wealth Talks, where we bring you the facts so you can thrive in life. Have a wonderful week.